Hello everybody, welcome along to this video. Mr. Johnson teaches Macbeth, an introduction to the context. This video is really designed for those just setting out on their studying of Macbeth and setting the scene for you a little bit with information that's going to be really useful for you as you go through the play in better understanding it. And context can also really help enrich your answers and make your answers much stronger when it comes to your GCSE responses. So without further ado then, we're going to move straight into it then, and it looks something a little bit like this. Context is a word you're going to hear used a lot, probably across your English lessons. You might well have come across it already. In fact, I hoped you would. Context, as I put there, it's what is it and why do you need to know it? Well, the first bullet point says it's the circumstances that form the setting around a text. So in many ways, another word I'd be putting it is what was happening at the time that something was being written. For Inspector Calls, there's a real sort of context which sort of is around like the First World War, the Second World War. There are many other books I could list right now where the context and what was happening in the world affected the writers in some way, and that then feeds into what they write. So for my second bullet point there then, the context for Macbeth includes there's assassination attempts going on in the country at this time, with Scotland was a real big player at the minute because England and Scotland have just been united by the same king, and treason going against the king as well. All of these things then feature in the play Macbeth because they were happening in the world, and William Shakespeare took those ideas and built a story and a play around them. So let's talk about William Shakespeare then. Really worth making notes as you watch these videos as well. Any video that you're watching on YouTube, have your pen and paper ready and be jotting down some of this key information. You don't necessarily need it word for word, but it will help you cement those facts into your mind if you're also writing some of this down. And don't forget, of course, you can always pause YouTube videos if we're going too quickly and go back and watch bits again. So let's talk about Shakespeare then himself, the man who wrote the play. 1564 to 1616, he was 52 years old when he died. He had a good lifetime. As I put my first bullet point, one of Britain's most famous writers of plays and poems. Absolutely, without doubt, one of the most famous faces in British history, William Shakespeare. He wrote, on my second bullet point, around 38 plays. We don't have accurate records. The time that he was living isn't one where everything was recorded and documented and kept safe. So we think there are 38 plays. It might be there are more which have been lost, but certainly that number we're looking at there, which is a huge number. He was active and writing for about 20 years or so. So to produce that many in that time is incredible. He was producing sometimes 3-4 plays a year. And it's important to note that his plays are generally split down into 3 categories, which are called the histories, the comedies, and the tragedies. Histories would be play about kings mainly. There was ones about Henry V, there was ones about Richard II, famous English kings. He also wrote comedies, such as A Midsummer Night's Dream being a very good example of a comedy, Twelfth Night being another. And tragedies, so the dark doom and gloom ones. Othello would be one of those. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy because of how it ends, and so is Macbeth. And that's really important for you to know, that the play you are studying here is one of his tragedies. Also maybe to note, he also wrote 154 sonnets. Sonnets are a type of poem which follow a really particular strong structure of 14 lines in that poem. Each line has got 10 syllables, which has an iambic pentameter beat to it as well, which is quite an incredible number, 154. And he also wrote some other much longer poems. We believe he was an actor. From what we can tell, again, records aren't clear, but we certainly believe he acted in some of his own plays, but also he acted in plays of other people as well. It was a really rich time where there was lots of plays being put on, so Shakespeare was surrounded by other inspiration as well as acting in other people's plays. And he's still studied today. A lot of students ask this question, well, why are we studying Shakespeare 400 years later? And the answer is, as I've put at the bottom there, his works are really, really good at examining the human condition, as in what is it to be human? We feel love, we feel jealousy, we feel joy, we feel happiness, we feel sadness. His plays really tap into accurately exploring what it is to be a human being. So that's the reason why. So there's some facts about William Shakespeare, the man who wrote the play. Now let's talk about the Jacobean era. I'm particularly focusing on 1606 because that is the year that Macbeth was first performed. We don't know when it was written. It could have been written a year, 2 years beforehand, but we know it was first performed in 1606. And the Jacobean era is the name that's given from 1603 to about, I think it's right, 1642. I could be wrong there. It might be a little bit later, but certainly spanning a good few years. So let's set the history. The picture of the lady you see there, that is Queen Elizabeth I. She died in 1603, leaving no direct heir to the throne because she didn't have any children of her own. So she then passed the throne, the crown, on to her cousin, who here you can see now, James I of England. He was James VI of Scotland already, and he was her cousin. His mother was Elizabeth's sister. But he then went on to become James I of England, which meant the countries had the same king. And it united, because England and Scotland were very, very different countries at this point. While they've always shared a border, there had been long time, for many, many years, hundreds of years, they've been fighting between them. Having the same king started this process of uniting England and Scotland. So think about it. Shakespeare is a writer. He would quite like the king to take an interest in his plays and him as well. So what's he going to do? Well, he's going to write a play about a Scottish king and set it in Scotland because the real life king was from Scotland. Also worth noting, you may have heard of this before, the gunpowder plot. This was a plot by 12 men, roughly speaking, but also there could have been more. They wanted to blow up Parliament, quite famously. There were barrels and barrels of gunpowder put on beneath Parliament, and it was going to be when the king and all his officials and everyone was sitting there that they were going to set light to this gunpowder and blow it up. This was 1605. 1 year later, we get a play about an assassination of a king. So you can again see how real life events like the gunpowder plot inspired Shakespeare, and he took those sorts of ideas like assassination and fed them into his play. So it made his plays much more current. They were about things that were happening at the time. There'd been, I forgot to show you the picture as well. That is a bit of a picture of some of the gunpowder plotters. Guido Fawkes, or Guy Fawkes in the middle, is the one we famously link with it, and like with the 5th of November and so forth. But actually, there were many conspirators, as you can see there. There'd also been persecution of Catholics and by Protestants. So Christianity can be split down into sort of various strands of it, and there had been a lot of, to summarise it simply, problems between Catholics and Protestants at this time. King James really allowed some harsh methods to control Catholics following the 1605 gunpowder plot, which was by some Catholics who wanted to get rid of him as a Protestant king. So if I'm summarising it simply, you've got fighting going on between sort of aspects of religion going on at this time, and not every Catholic person was burnt, not at all, but certainly the strongest punishment for those who were potentially doing really bad, evil things would be to be burnt at the stake. And don't forget, this is a time as well, to set the scene for you, that many people believed in witches. A number of people in Shakespeare's audience would have believed in witches and the idea of witches. That is a witch there being dunked. There's like they used to use ducking stools and so forth as punishment. Some were burnt at the stake as well. But what I put in there really is there were lots and lots of witch trials, people being put on trial for being a witch, and a number were executed. It's worth noting that King James, he took a real personal interest in some of these witch trials, and he even wrote a book on the subject of magic called Demonology, as I've put there. But once again, think about the Macbeth, which is a play which involves witches, and now you can start understanding why. The context of the time was there's a real fascination with this going on in the country as well. So again, he feeds that idea of witches into his play. Let's talk about the theatres themselves as well, because what we have to remember is when you study Macbeth, although it looks like a book to you, it isn't. It's a script. Actors would have had that script and they would have used it to perform it as a play. So there would have been an audience watching it. Now, theatre may have seemed like it's been around forever for us, but this was a time really round about when this play was performed that theatre was really starting to become a popular form of entertainment for the masses. Many of them couldn't read and write, and so therefore they couldn't read books. There was no visual entertainment, there was no photography or film or movies or anything like that, of course. So this is a time where if you wanted entertainment, wanted to see something new, you'd go to a playhouse like this and you'd be in the audience. So it was a real popular entertainment for everybody, from the rich ruling classes to the poor. All of them could go in. If you were poor, you could stand and watch the play for several hours there. You were called a groundling. But basically, it was a really popular rising type of entertainment. Lots of purpose-built theatres began to appear as well. Up until this point, many theatre groups would just perform in like pub yards and so forth, or outside in common green spaces in villages, and go on tour. Theatres started to be built so they could actually have somewhere to perform their plays as well, including the Globe Theatre, which I'll show you in a minute, which was built in 1599. There were theatre groups, as my bullet point says there, such as the King's Men. Shakespeare was one of the King's Men, so they would perform their plays for the King and others. But others went on tour, as I've said, around the country, performing in pubs and in villages. Worth noting that no women were allowed on the stage at this point. So any female parts would have been played by a male actor. It's often young boys as well, because of their voices not breaking, they could sound more feminine. But yeah, dressed up and a man in drag, basically. Now, the Globe Theatre itself, which I'll show you now, could hold up to 3,000 people. What you're looking at there is not the original Globe Theatre. It's a reproduction. It was rebuilt about 25 years ago. But it is following as closely as they could the materials and so forth that would have been used at the time to make it as accurately look like the old Globe Theatre, which was partly owned by Shakespeare. It wasn't his theatre, but him and his company performed there, and he did own a part of it as well. That's what it looks inside the modern recreation. There's those people standing there watching the play. There's the people sat round, all round in a massive, massive semicircle. These days it's 1,500, but yeah, 3,000 people could go and watch a play, and they really did. They were very, very popular. As I said, a form of entertainment for those who couldn't read and write. And also books were really expensive to print as well. So I want to just add an extra level of detail to your context knowledge as well, which is Greek tragedy. So these are a form of drama which originated around 5 BC, so we're talking about 2,500 years ago now. But they were really popular, and they influenced lots of other playwrights like Shakespeare, who used some of the character types who appeared in Greek tragedy in their works. So what I'm saying is, these Greek tragedies, these original Greek plays, the types of characters would happen again and again, and writers like Shakespeare like to use those in their own works. So for example, the tragic hero, which I should have put in bold there, but it says tragic hero, that was a common character type which you do see in Macbeth as well. Macbeth is a tragic hero, and he would have had and does have some of these characteristics. Now, I'm not going to focus on all of those. I'd really recommend pausing that slide and making some notes about those, particularly for those of you who absolutely fancy doing really well in your English. Impress your English teacher by dropping some of those phrases in. Number 1 is hamartia, which is really worth focusing on as well, like flaws and making the wrong decisions. Absolutely happens. But also number 4, hubris, is something which you will see in my other videos as well. But hubris is when you're absolutely got too much pride and you almost allow that to overtake your decision making because you so strongly believe in what you're doing that actually you make mistakes, and that's what leads to your downfall. A tragic hero would die. A hero being someone who you believe in and follow, but if they're a tragic hero, they have an unpleasant end of some description. So there you go, an extra level of detail for you, which maybe makes you understand the play Macbeth in a slightly different way. So these questions are all about checking your understanding. So I would like you now to pause this video and have a go at answering those questions somewhere. They will test your understanding of the video you've just watched, and also there's some of the key bits of information that you absolutely should have written down somewhere. So that's the end of this video once you've paused and had a go at that. I hope you found it useful. Do check out my other videos on my channel, which are linking to Macbeth. There'll be videos on other bits of the context, which I could go into in more detail, which are important. I've done a series of videos which break down every single key scene for you as well. So there's lots to get your teeth into, and of course there are other YouTube videos, and BBC Bite Size is a fantastic resource as well. So I wish you the very best of luck when it comes to your when you do your GCSEs or any sorts of assessments on Macbeth, and I'll say thank you very much for watching this video, and goodbye.